everyone, I'm Allie. Join me as we make this stunning crystal pendant featuring a bead you probably already have, a 14mm Rivoli. We're also going to change it up and use hubble stitch in a single and a double row. So make sure to stay tuned to watch if you need a little help with that stitch. Also, as always, if you need any materials, click on the show more right underneath the video to get links to the products online. For this pendant, we're going to be starting out with hubble stitch, and we're going to do 2 rows of hubble stitch, which is going to create the interior bezel along the front and the back of the design. I'm featuring a 14mm Rivoli here. This one is in the Colorshift Moonlight, and I'm using the gold champagne. We're going to begin again going over and working with hubble stitch. The stitch is going to start with 2 Delicas and then 1 11-0 seed bead. The Delica I'm using is the Duracoat Galvanized Dark Berry, and then the 11-0 is the Duracoat Galvanized Gold. I'm gonna let that drop down on the piece towards the end of the thread, and then sew back through bead number 1 toward bead number 2. We're gonna add a 4th bead in now, and the 4th bead is gonna sit between beads 1 and 2. So I'm adding my 4th bead, and then I'm going to sew down through bead number 2 toward bead number 3. That right there is our first little hubble unit. We're going to repeat 2 Delicas followed by 1 11-0 seed bead. Let that drop down towards your previous unit. Take your needle and thread, sew back through bead number 1 in that grouping of 3 toward bead number 2. Give a nice tight pull, making sure that the thread goes right next to the previous unit. Add 1 more Delica and sew down bead number 2. There's your 2nd unit. All right, ready for our 3rd unit. 2, then 1. Once again down so that I'm coming out of beads number 1 and number 2. Between beads number 1 and number 2, I'm going to stick bead number 4 and sew down through bead number 2. And that finishes out my 3rd unit. If you're having trouble with this, remember I have a basic hubble stitch video as well, learning how to do hubble stitch. I'm going to continue till I have 12 total units, and then I'll show you how we're going to round them out, connecting the 2 ends and adding in the baseline for our bezel. Once you have 12 hubble units, it's time for us to group them all together to create a nice rounded loop. To do so, you're coming out of your last unit here, coming down out of bead number 2, and you're going to go over to the start. You're going to sew up through bead number 1 at the start. That's going to round this out. Then sew down through, or over through bead number 4, remember the one that sticks out at the top. Sew down through bead number 2. Stay within that same hubble unit, so still in that first unit here, and sew through your bead number 3, that gold round 11. Coming out here then, that links our stitches together. What I'm going to do now is grab 1 Delica bead, and I'm going to sew through the next gold seed bead. Again, Delica through the next gold seed bead. As you're looking at hubble stitch for this first row, see how it wants to kind of fold back and forth? Make sure you're always sewing through the gold and then turn them in towards the center. Delica goes on, sew through our next gold bead. So we're going to end up with 12 Delicas going on between each of the 12 gold beads that sit at the base of the hubble stitch. When you're to the last bead and you're putting on your last Delica bead, you're going to sew back through the first gold bead and then kind of cinch it tighter by sewing through the first Delica and out that 2nd gold bead. This center row now is going to be the front of our piece. From here, we're going to get out to the exterior, or the 4th bead in our hubble stitch, and we're going to create another row of hubble on top of it. So I'm sewing through my beads here that are in the same unit of that hubble stitch. So it's going through the bottom, bead number 3, gold bead, up bead number 1, and out and through bead number 4. Remember that one that sits at the top. We're going to create our second row of our hubble stitch, which is going to connect to that Delica bead number 4 at each of the top of the 12 units. To connect, I want to put 1 and 2 gold beads on. So through that same bead, so my thread was coming out the right, it's going into the left, back out through the right, setting them side by side, sewing up through bead number 1, just right there. And then I'm going to add a Delica as my 4th bead and down through bead number 2. And that has your next hubble stitch on top of that. I'm going to flip this in my hand just because I like to work from the left to the right and continue on. 2 gold beads get added on. Connect to bead number 3, which is going to be the top bead of the hubble unit below it. So back through bead number 1 of the gold beads, toward bead number 2. Pull that thread through, and then add a Delica and sew down through the bead. And I should have mentioned also that I'm using the beige wildfire beading thread with a size 12 needle. Sorry, I forgot about that earlier. I have my 2 gold beads on, through bead number 3, which is the hubble unit, and I'm sewing toward the last unit that I just added. Up through bead number 1, come out between beads 1 and 2, and add a Delica bead for bead number 4, and back down bead 2. So I'm going to continue this the whole way around, adding in this secondary row. As you get into your 11th and 12th hubble stitches, you'll start to notice that this starts to form into a little bit of a bowl shape. That's what we want because our Rivoli is going to sit right in the interior there. Finishing up this second row of hubble stitch, when I finish with my 12th there, you'll notice that I need to connect the 2. So don't move on until you connect the 2. I'm going to sew up through bead number 1 that we first put on that first gold bead, closing that up together, and see how that's starting to form that bowl. And then I'm also going to sew through bead number 4, that top Delica bead, pulling that closer. As I do that, I'm going to take my Rivoli, put it face down into my bezel, and now I'm going to connect all of my Delica beads. Delica bead goes on, and I sew through the next Delica bead 4. So I'm sewing on just like I did the hubble stitch in the front, sewing onto the bottom bead. Now I'm sewing onto the top bead, just that Delica. And as I pull, you'll notice that it pulls that bezel tighter and tighter. So you're going around here adding 12 new beads, connecting to each of the Delica beads. Finishing up along the back, I'm just going to sew back through the first bead, as well as the first Delica that I added in there. And then just like any time you do a bezel, it's important to tighten this up, whether the front or the back. We'll come back around and tighten the front again. You're just going to sew back through your last row that you added in, pull nice and tight, and that's going to just cinch up that back a little bit more because you don't want to have any beads break or have any issues as you're creating. So you can just see I'm able to sew pretty much 2 beads at a time, sewing through, speed beading as I call it, sewing through all of those beads. Once you're through all of those beads, which is going to be 24 total, we're going to get ready to add on. Where we're going to add on, oh, and I forgot, you can see your crystal now at the front. So see that nice bright crystal. It's always fun too to see how different it looks based on the different colors. We're going to start to grab on to our 11O gold seed beads that lay around the outer edge. So coming out the Delica, I'm going to sew up into one of those gold beads. Now, it's a little tricky. You want to make sure that you are in one of your hubble units and that you're not, or between 2 of your hubble units and not in one. So look up to the top and make sure that you're coming out of a gold bead that sits between the 2 beads, not one of the gold beads that is connected to that Delica. So you're going to bridge that gap right now. We're going to add 1, 2, 3 more gold 11Os and sew down the next gold bead from the next hubble stitch row. That's going to create a little peak there in the design. So up through the next gold bead, and this time just add one gold bead. So down towards the back through the next bead, and then up towards the front on the next gold bead. So you're constantly sewing to the back and to the front. From here then, 3 beads go on. Sew through the next gold bead toward the back, because those beads are sitting in a herringbone style. So up through the next gold bead, and this time once again, just 1 bead. Down toward the back, up toward the front. I'm going to continue with that rotation of 3, 1, 3, sewing down towards the back, up towards the top, and then adding in the beads as we go. This is going to give us our nice units here of our little peaks and our little valleys with just 1 as we go around. You'll end up with 6 peaks and 6 of those, 6 of the peaks that look like 5 and 6 of the peaks that look like 3, alternating them around the Rivoli. So as I finish up adding in the last of my 11-0 seed beads there on the point, I'm coming out of one of the single 11-0 points. I'm going to go into that first point that I made through the first 2 11-0s there, the one that sits along the hubble, and then the first one that I decorated with in that group of 3. And then I'm going to bring my needle to come out through that center bead, bead number 2 of that last group of 3. You can see all of those peaks sitting nicely along the side. This is also a great little almost snowflake look if you want to stop here, or you can keep going. If you do stop here, make sure to comment below, let us know, and if you made any changes, also give that feedback in the comments also. It helps all the different beaders that are watching, all of you Potomac beaders, to learn from each other. So from here, I'm going to grab 2 Delicas at the point, 1 11-0, and 1 of my RounDuo minis. The RounDuo mini I'm using is in that vintage copper color, back to the gold, and then 2 of my Delicas. And so right on over to the next peak. That's going to have that RounDuo mini sit right over that individual point there. Continuing on, again, this is going to repeat 6 times as we go in between each one of our 6 points, adding in 2 Delicas, 1 11, 1 of our RounDuo mini, another 11, 2 Delicas, and then once again over to the next little point. So 2, 1, 1, over. Getting ready then to sew on to the next point, and I have 3 more to go. As I'm adding this next one in here, I'm going back through that first seed bead that my thread was coming out of, the 2 Delicas, the 11, and then my first hole of that RounDuo mini that I did here, and pulling that nice and tight. From here, I'm going to step up. So I'm going from the first hole of the RounDuo mini to the second hole, and I'm keeping to that same RounDuo mini. So you'll see a little bit of thread on the side. Don't worry about it too much. By the time we add on marbling, you won't see it at all. From here, we're going to connect the RounDuo minis to the center 3 beads of each point, my Delica, 11 Delica. And to do that, you can see here, we're going to be using 3 of our 11-0 seed beads. So we're going to pick up 3 golds, sew into the Delica, 11 Delica that sits in the middle, and then pick up 1, 2, 3 more 11s onto the second hole of the next RounDuo. So as we go around the RounDuo minis, we just put these 3 beads on. We catch the 3 beads that lay in the middle of each of those point sections, and then we continue on. So you're going to end up with 12 of these little groups of 3, 1 on each side of your 6 RounDuo minis. Again, once you're done this step, you could, if you want to, stop and keep the pendant as it is. That's what I love about creating these Rivoli pendants. You really can take it to the max or keep it really simple. Coming out of the RounDuo mini, I'm going to sew down through the first 3 seed beads that I added. Here's where we're going to pick up our SS22 4mm Potomac Crystal Chatons. And I'm going to make sure that as I pick it up, I'm going through the bottom hole facing forward. So I put it through the hole on the diagonal. Look right there on the back, see that diagonal? to make sure when I take my needle and thread up through the next 3 seed beads, my crystal is going to sit in the correct location and facing upright. If you have it that it's not facing upright, just unsew and go back and add it upright. From here, we're going to add 1, 2, 3, and 4 seed beads, and then we're going to sew down through our next set of 3. In between the set of 3, grab your next chaton, sew through so you make sure your chaton is facing upright, and up through the next 3 seed beads. Continue around, adding in until you have your 6 chatons and your 4 beads along the tops of all of your RounDuo minis. So just around you go, repeating. Just like we did on the RounDuo mini now, after we add our last 4 seed beads, we're going to step up through the bezeled chaton. So I'm going back through hole number 1 that I was already through when I added the first one here, out to the other side then of the chaton. And then we're going to step up, meaning we're going to go along the side of the chaton here and go up to the outer or top hole and come on out. That's going to get us ready now to go around the piece, pull the chatons that match the Rivoli into focus by adding in here 2 Delicas with an 11-0 before it. So 1 11-0, 2 Delicas. We're going to catch back on to those 4 seed beads that we added at the top of the RounDuo mini, sewing through the first 2, coming out between them, adding in 1 more 11-0, and then sewing down the next 2. What that's going to do is create that nice little point there. From here then, 2 Delicas, 1 11 into that top diagonal hole of the next chaton. Repeating here, 11, 2 Delicas, up through the first 2 beads, add 1 11, down through the next 2 beads. Give a nice little tight pull, and that really helps to tighten this up, make those chatons sit nice facing forward, and that it doesn't have any curvature to it as we're working with the pendant. So go ahead, continue around, adding in your Delicas and your 11-0s. Once you've gone around and connected to that outer row, you can really see it start to take shape, and it's fun to see how different colors can affect the look and the design of the piece as you're looking a little bit more fun and flowery and a little bit more fall and fancy. And here I'm going to create my bail now. So I'm coming out my last chaton and I'm sewing through the 11-0, through the Delicas, and I'm going to get up to that point, which is the first 11-0 that I added as I went this final time around. Coming out of the point here, I'm going to add a simple wire guard in the copper color, because then I'm just going to string it on a nice brown leather cord, adding a jump ring to it. Coming out here, I'm going to go up through the wire guard, down through the wire guard on the other side. If you don't have a wire guard, you can use 10 or so 11-0 seed beads, either the Delicas or the rounds. Back through that same 11-0, my thread's coming out the right-hand side there, I'm going into the left, which is going to spin that wire guard right to the center between that bead. Reinforce going up through the wire guard, down the other side of the wire guard, and then once again through that 11-0 seed bead to center that out. At this point, all I have to do then is sew my thread and needle in towards the center. See how I'm going down that line right there, down through that nice V seed bead line, sewing along the project so I don't see any extra thread, and I'm going to simply get my thread ends so they're at the same spot, and I can tie my 2 thread ends together. So here I go, going around here, going around that back, thread ends get to the same point. And we're just going to tie a knot, and if you have a thread zap or a thread burner, we're just going to burn. Don't overcomplicate it, just tie the 2 thread ends together. You can see how pretty this pendant is from the back side as well. Also, if you don't have the Chatons, you can switch it up for some mini silkies, or you can even switch it up for just a 4mm round. Just know it's going to sit, or a bicone, it's just going to sit a little bit differently if you're using 1 hole versus 2. I'm going to take the thread zap or the thread burner, burn these off, change the view a tiny bit so you can see how this looks. It's about 1.5 inches, or it is about 3 centimeters. You can see how they look on the neck and the size that they are. I'm going to throw mine on some leather and call it a day. Thanks so much for watching, and hopefully you enjoy making your own pendant. Remember, there's tons of changes after that initial hubble stitch. So have fun creating your own and make it into your own design. Remember, if you need any materials, check out the links below the video in the description. If you're on an iPad or an iPhone, that little down caret, that'll help to get you there right underneath the video on the right-hand side. Thanks so much for watching, and enjoy the next video.